Okay, so let's get started looking at sculpting in Blender. So all I have here is a new Blender scene, and I'm just going to select everything and delete it. And to demonstrate sculpting to you, I'm going to add a new UV sphere. And I want to increase this resolution by quite a bit. Sculpting is very powerful, but it requires the object to have a very high number of polygons in order to work properly. And so you'll often see pieces that are sculpted referred to as high poly pieces, and this is just what this means. It just means it has a large number of vertices per surface area on the mesh, which is also known as a dense mesh. I'm just going to divide this one more time by adding a subdivision surface and applying it. So now we have a mesh that's about this dense. Okay, so let's jump into the Sculpting Workspace by coming up to the top of the screen and looking at where we have all of our workspaces laid out and clicking on the tab that says Sculpting. And you'll get this screen, and you should have a brush under your cursor by default. If you do not, you might not be in sculpting mode. So the way we switch between sculpting mode is similar to the way we switch between edit mode and object mode. And in fact, the option lives in the same menu. So to get in and out of sculpting mode, we just need to come up here to where it says sculpt mode and click the drop down. From here, we can move into object mode and edit mode, which we are already familiar with. So the circle under my cursor is the brush, and it just indicates where my strokes are going to be placed and how large they will be. So if I just come in here and click and drag on this mesh, you'll see that it is drawing under my cursor. It is drawing onto the mesh by basically pulling these vertices away from it. Now we can change things like the size of our cursor by hitting this radius slider, or by using the bracket keys on the keyboard to the left bracket being to size down, the right bracket to be size up. And we can also change the size of the brush by pressing F on our keyboard, which will bring up this sort of circle slider that when you drag in and out with your cursor, you can adjust the size that way. We can adjust the strength of the brush by coming up to this slider right here. Pull it up to have more of an effect under our cursor when we click and drag. Down will have less of an effect. In fact, you can barely see the strokes I'm making at that low of a strength. But you get the idea. The brush strength can also be set via a hotkey. If you press Shift and F on your keyboard, you will get this sort of circular slider with the number in the middle being the strength. So pulling it all the way out until the inner circle meets the outer circle will give you a strength of 1, which is the maximum strength. Pressing Shift and F and bringing it in will give you a lower strength. And the strength is represented visually by the black sort of soft circle that appears in the center of this cursor. Now, clicking and dragging with any brush you have selected will perform that brush's operation as is set by its default, which for the draw brush means that it is pulling these vertices in the positive direction, which is away from the mesh. So as I continue to draw strokes on this, you can see that we're getting this raised section under where we draw our strokes. So this is the default direction for the draw brush, and it is in the positive direction, but we can just as easily cut into this mesh and push these vertices down into the negative direction by holding Control and then making our strokes. You can see we've cut into it. You can see the directionality of your brush by coming up here and looking at this plus and minus icon next to the strength slider. So this has the plus icon highlighted, which just means that this brush is currently in positive mode. And when we hold Control, it is in negative. If we wanted to switch this, we could press the negative button. So now if I click and drag, this brush pushes in. And if I press Control and click, it pushes out. Some brushes will be positive by default, others will be negative, and that is just something you're going to have to learn over time and practice using the brushes. The last feature I want to talk about before we get into what these brushes all do is the smooth brush. Now, smooth is a standalone brush. It can be found right here in the brush palette, but it is much quicker. Blender has, of course, another hotkey to more quickly access this feature because you will be smoothing quite frequently. So if you want to quickly smooth on the fly as you are sculpting, all you need to do is hold Shift and click and drag over your mesh to smooth out those areas. There are some other advanced features here for the brush, the stroke, the fall off, and even the display of your cursor. I won't be covering these in too much detail right now as we are just trying to get a feel for the basics of sculpting, but feel free to have a look at these, play around with the settings, and see what they do. So that is just the very basics of the sculpting interface in Blender. I'm going to pause the recording, and in the next video, we're going to be looking at these brushes on an individual level. So I will see you then.